Well, welcome to the end of the conference. My name is Todd Sevig, and I'm Director of Counseling and Psychological Services here on campus, which is the Student Counseling Center, and very proud to be a co-chair with John Graydon and Daniel Eisenberg on this conference. It's hard to believe that it's the 14th conference. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming, whether you came down the street from on campus here or from elsewhere in the country. What a wonderful conference, huh? Great day and a half. It's amazing. Let's keep reflecting. But my main job right now is we are bringing it home here at the conference. So, every once in a while, I think we need to think outside the box, whether the lines and boundaries of the box were made for us or imposed on us, or maybe whether we impose that on ourselves. But our next speaker, our final keynote, our bringer home of the conference, I think has done that, which he is going to share with us. We're so proud and happy to have Robert Morris here. Dr. Morris earned his undergraduate degree in psychology from Princeton University and his PhD in Media Arts and Sciences from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, commonly called MIT. I don't know if, yeah, MIT. Prior to attending MIT, he worked in the departments of clinical and cognitive neuroscience at Harvard and at the Massachusetts General Hospital. Preparing for this, I looked at what's there. It's amazing. Like, I know we're at the end of the conference and it's 3 o'clock and it's kind of humid and maybe a little sweaty, but this is kind of important stuff here. We're pushing the boundaries, and thank you. But back to Robert. So his research interests lie in the intersection of design, crowdsourcing, computer-based interventions for mental health. He's an award-winning designer and inventor, and his work's been featured in Time magazine, Wired magazine, NPR, the BBC, the Boston Globe, and probably others that we don't know about. He's currently the co-founder of Koko, a social network for mental health and well-being, which he's going to share with us today. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Morris.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, first of all, to this conference. I was delighted and excited to be invited here because the theme is something that has touched my life personally, as I'm sure it has for many of you in this audience. So right about when I was just starting work on the project that I'm going to talk about today, I was actually in pretty poor health myself. I had bouts of severe depression. I had daily debilitating migraines, and at one point I met the clinical definition for severe disability with my migraines. And yet, in my infinite wisdom, I decided at that time to pursue a PhD at MIT, despite having had no engineering training whatsoever. I'd never taken an engineering course. I'd never written a line of code. In my defense, I enrolled in a program called Media Arts and Sciences, and I thought the arts part of that would allow me to sidestep the rigorous, advanced mathematics and computer science that MIT is known for. And when I got there, my advisor at the time said, "Okay, Rob, let's get you started with some classes. There's this great class called Signals and Systems I want you to start with." And I said, "Okay." And then I got my first problem set, and this is what one of the first pages looked like. This is kind of like the helpful summary they give you to just prepare you to do the actual problems. I was at MIT for almost 7 years. I still don't know what any of this means. In addition to math, I was expected to write code at an expert level. At where I was, the Media Lab, we build technological artifacts. We have to hack things. We have to prototype rapidly. So we have to have an incredible fluency with many types of computer languages. And I probably would have dropped out, given that expectation, were it not for this one website. This one website alone really saved me at MIT, I believe. And this is called Stack Overflow. If you're not familiar with it, it is a question and answer site for programmers. So when you're learning to code, you have any problems with your code, you can go on to Stack Overflow and you can describe how your code is breaking. And within minutes, this hive of computer programmers will magically come to your rescue and give you these incredibly elegant solutions. It's incredible. It's truly a marvel of collective intelligence. It looks a lot like a basic discussion forum, but it has incredible sophistication in engineering and social design to be the awesome platform that it is. So this was one of my life preservers at MIT in the early days especially. But for all of its benefits, it did fail me in one pretty crucial respect. And that is when I was learning to code, the biggest struggles I had and the biggest stress I had was not the bugs in my code themselves, but the way in which I thought about them. So when my code failed, I'd construe myself as a failure. I'd think, I don't belong here. This is ridiculous. So what I'd really want to type into Stack Overflow was expressions of that frustration. And when you're learning to write code, it is an incredibly emotional experience. And if you type something like this or something more profane into Stack Overflow, you'll see that a lot of programmers feel this way. It's a pretty common thing. But Stack Overflow is not designed for this. But as I was using this and kind of reflecting on my training, which was not engineering but psychology, I started to think that, wow, just as we could build this amazing system to help us identify and fix bugs in our code, perhaps we could do something similar to help us identify and fix bugs in our thinking. So I started getting to thinking, wow, I want to build a Stack Overflow for the mind. I want to build a platform that leverages collective intelligence to help people like myself learn to think more flexibly, realistically about stressful situations. And I reasoned that this could be valuable not just for disgruntled programmers, but really for anyone dealing with negative thoughts and difficult situations. And so this was something I worked on quite a bit, at first as a side project, and I'll sort of trace that trajectory for you. And it has now evolved from that to a dissertation to a clinical trial to a mobile app now serving thousands and thousands of people over 155 countries. We have people in the Middle East, Russia. It's a really worldwide community at this point. And the therapeutic basis for this is inspired by cognitive behavioral therapy, and the goal is to help people think more flexibly in general. And I'll go into more detail about that. But one of the crucial things to note is that it's designed to work not necessarily with trained supervisors or clinicians or therapists, but rather by coordinating the collective efforts of all the peers and building structures around it to create a really impressive collective intelligence system. So whenever I introduce or give an elevator pitch about this project, this kind of weird idea of crowdsourced cognitive therapy, I always get one question. So this is a very common question that comes up when I'm talking about a peer-to-peer internet delivery system. People always wonder, what do you do about trolling? There's this sense that trolling is absolutely pervasive on the web, especially when you're cloaked in anonymity. I think that's true to some extent, but I think what most people don't know is there are some incredibly robust ways to manage trolls. So we use a whole host of approaches, which I can get into later if anyone is interested, but I just wanted to preface the talk by letting you know the trolls are under control on this app, and we're very, very proud of that. So before I describe the Koko app and some of the things I've learned while building and continuing to tweak it, I just want to quickly review some of the psychological foundations behind it that motivated me personally and my collaborators. To do that, I want to go all the way back to 100 AD. So this is the Roman Stoic philosopher Epictetus. And he wrote that what really frightens or dismays us is not external events themselves, but the way in which we think about them. So this is this, well-trodden idea that the content of our thoughts affects how we feel, and by extension, if we can modify our thoughts or our relationship to our thoughts, we can profoundly change our emotional experience. So this is an idea that's come up in religion, philosophy, literature. It's a core idea in a lot of modern cognitive therapies and other evidence-based therapies. And it's now widely researched in psychology under the name cognitive reappraisal. So this is a strategy for managing the adversities of life and life stressors that involves reinterpreting a thought or situation to alter an emotional experience. So just a quick example of this. This is a picture which pretty accurately describes my commute in Boston when I was living there. There's something about Boston drivers where there's this like white-knuckled rage that's very pervasive. And I grew up in California, and coming to that culture was very disorienting for me. And I used to get so angry myself. It was this kind of contagion of anger that would happen to me, making my commute pretty unpleasant. I eventually stumbled upon my own sort of reframe strategy for this. I also used some kind of acceptance strategies, but one idea I often thought about was like, well, what is provoking this person to such incredible and sometimes ludicrous displays of anger? And I would start to like really meditate on that, and I'd think, well, maybe they're going to commute to a job they really hate, and maybe their boss is evil or something, or maybe their personal life is in disarray. And so I'd kind of shift my anger to more compassion and pity, and that would help a lot. I think one thing about this strategy, and it is just one strategy of many, is that for any stressful situation, there are often a million different ways to think about it. And we have this incredible choice about the narrative we attach to different situations. And some narratives may resonate with some people more than others. It's highly subjective, but it's a very interesting tool to regulate emotions. And it's been studied quite widely, and psychologists find that people who report using this strategy to regulate emotions, on the whole, they show a pretty enviable affective profile. There's lower incidence of depression, better interpersonal functioning, and so on. And so these are correlational studies, and there have been dozens of these. There also have been a variety of lab studies which show you can induce anger or negative emotions in the laboratory, and if you get people to employ some version of this strategy, it generally shows some benefits. So it's a really interesting strategy. It's been well studied. Again, it forms the backbone for a lot of modern therapies. But there is a problem with it that I've experienced personally, and I don't think is talked about as much as it should be in the literature, and that is it's hard. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. When you're stressed, your ability to think creatively and with poise is pretty systematically impaired, and if you're struggling with depression or anxiety, it might be even more difficult. And I think this is articulated best by Andrew Solomon in his great memoir on depression. He wrote, "It's hard to wrestle with your own consciousness because you have no tool in this battle except your consciousness itself." And he was sort of griping a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapies in this passage. But I think what we've kind of talked about in this conference quite at length is this idea that we have access to other resources. We have access to an extended collective consciousness. And there's such value in peer support and social support. And there's so much research showing that strong social ties can be a protective factor against depression and other things. And I think we're still trying to understand how and why this works. And there are obviously many factors. But one factor could be that your support providers can be this extra consciousness at the times you need it. They can help you flexibly generate and select alternative appraisals. So, if I get fired from my job, my good friend or my wife might remind me, hey, didn't you hate that job? Didn't you hate your boss? Isn't there like another job that you were just really interested about? These kinds of thoughts that are sometimes wholly inaccessible when you're in the thick of a very stressful situation. Of course, there are times when we may not be able to reach out to our close peers. We may want to remain anonymous for various reasons. And I think that impulse is the reason why a lot of people flock to online social support systems. So I've been looking at these and studying and researching these for a long time, and it's a really complex landscape of offerings, and it seems to me a lot of people go to places they already are. So they might hack Twitter and start using Twitter for social support, or people go on popular apps like Whisper. This is a confessional app, and they'll use that. Even though ostensibly it's not designed to be a peer-to-peer social support app, people will use these apps to reach out and sort of seek out peer support. And there's a whole host of apps dedicated to this. There are, of course, internet support groups. This is a screenshot from a very popular CBT app that within it has a bunch of user communities. These are just open forums. There's not really any moderation. People are just going on and trying to connect with other people like them. So I think there's a lot of promise with this approach, but a lot of the offerings have some considerable flaws. Many are not moderated, and so you do get malicious behavior, particularly for platforms. This is Quora, which is not built to be a social support network, but people are actively using it as such. They're also not really designed or tailored to reinforce or disseminate evidence-based techniques. So what I mean by that is a lot of these platforms may provide some great emotional support in the moment, and ideally maybe some informational support, and that should not be discounted, but they're not designed to necessarily provide psychoeducation or skill building or things that we might hope create enduring change for people. And the literature on these platforms, even though these are accessed in droves and people are flocking to these in wide numbers, there unfortunately isn't a whole lot of rigorous controlled trials or assessments of these platforms. So the research right now just generally shows a paucity of data about whether these work and which ones are working and how they're working. So I think there's a lot to be improved upon in this space. So on the other hand, so you have these social support apps. There are a whole host of apps that I would call self-guided mental health apps. These have no social connections whatsoever. There's no therapist or coach kind of overseeing your progress. It's really just like having kind of a CBT manual or set of worksheets in your pocket that you can consult at any time. And there's some obvious kind of benefits to this idea. One is, well, if you don't have therapists or clinicians necessarily in the loop, you could reach more people. It could be more inexpensive. There's a lot of data we can collect from how people use this, and it could possibly reach a lot of the people who are currently unable or unwilling to seek out formal mental health resources. And these apps have been around for a while and actually studied pretty rigorously. This is Beating the Blues, one of the early flagship apps. I think it was a web app at first. And there's now some mobile apps in this space as well. And again, like the promise of these is that they can scale and proliferate mental health techniques and psychoeducation to reach a huge audience. And some of the early research on this is actually pretty interesting. Some of the meta-analyses of these types of systems will show that they can be pretty effective in reducing symptoms of depression and anxiety. In general, the effect sizes seem to be a little weaker than in-person therapy, but it's surprising how effective these can be in controlled experimental trials. And so the goal is to maybe use some of these technologies and reach this landscape that's currently unmet. So this is a screenshot that the APA shared recently on Twitter. I saw it through Twitter, showing the distribution of licensed psychologists in just the US. And you can see there's whole swaths of America in this graph that kind of look like North Korea at night, if you've ever seen that image. So I think there's a lot of potential for technologies to help fill some of these gaps, however temporarily. The social workers, yes, as well. And the problem, though, that we're seeing in this field is as much promise as there seems to be in controlled trials, when you release these apps out into the app ecosystem, they rarely get used. Adherence is really quite terrible. I think 56% adherence rate is probably inflated from what I've learned since this slide went up. So the big problem is that people aren't using these. There are no natural pathways to engage people. Essentially, they're asking people to do homework on their phone. Oftentimes, they're not designed to meet how people use technology. Especially for mobile applications, people snack on mobile applications. We look at them for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes here and there. We're not going to sit down and read a 15-page psychoeducation manual on our phone or watch a 30-minute video, and yet a lot of these apps seem to follow those design principles. So my general assessment of these apps is, as great as it is to imagine tools that can be accessible to many, many people, accessibility is not a valuable resource if no one wants to access the content in the first place. So one idea is to kind of take the best of both these offerings and see if there's a way to sort of navigate in the middle. So what we could do is take the naturally engaging elements of social systems and maybe borrow some of those design principles that keep our eyes glued to Facebook and Instagram. There's so many naturally engaging and supportive pathways through social that we could use. But maybe we could also somehow build systems that also borrow the structure and some of the psychoeducation that comes with these self-guided interventions. And so that's kind of where I was always trying to position this project. And I'll tell you a little bit about how my thinking on it has changed. So when I was a grad student at MIT, I was really building this primarily for selfish reasons. I wanted this tool for myself. And that was a pretty powerful motivator at first. But I think how I originally envisioned it was short-sighted in many ways, which I'll get to. But one idea I had was, okay, I want this system where instead of doing a CBT-like thought record, I can type in my negative thought and send it out to this crowd. And being a good MIT student, my first approach to this was to make it as unwieldy and complicated as possible, because that's what we do. So I built this system where I use these algorithms to hire, recruit, and coordinate crowd workers. And I'd have different batches of workers all get trained in about 1 to 2 minutes to do something different and provide me different feedback based on what negative thought or situation I was describing. And then I have these like recursive loops where other crowd workers would come back and review the work of their peers and so forth. And it was a pretty fun, exciting time. I was using this service called Mechanical Turk, which is Amazon's online labor force. And as an MIT student, we drool whenever someone says there's an API for something. And there's an API for this service. So I was able to write code that would coordinate this whole like ballet of crowd work instantly. So all I'd have to do is type something, press return. These workers would get recruited, they get paid. Their jobs would take maybe a minute or two, they'd get paid 5 cents. And I'd have maybe 30 or 40 people working under the service, and I'd get a result in 5 minutes. So it was very complex at first, but I think that was important because I had to bootstrap this network. I didn't have a vast social network, and there was a little bit of a cold start problem. So using these workers was really helpful. But over time, with feedback from other people trying this out, I decided to simplify it, and especially from the end user's perspective, and make it resemble social platforms a little more closely. So things we're all familiar with, things we're very comfortable with. And so like a social platform, the app has evolved to have a lot of the same basic actions. So just like a social platform, you can post content. In this case, it will sort of guide and nudge you to complete a modified sort of thought record, but essentially you're just posting content. You can also compose responses, so this eventually grew to a place where I wasn't recruiting paid workers to come in and do this, but the users themselves could be respondents. At first, I wasn't sure what value that would have or why people would do it, but I built it anyway. And like a social system, there was also mechanisms to rate and curate material from other people, which is really important in any collective intelligence system. There's a lot of stuff. There's going to be variable quality, so you need systems to filter and highlight the best work. So I think the best way to illustrate this is just to go through an example. So this is a post someone submitted onto our system. So this is real data. And this person wrote, "My wife really wants a baby, but I'm not sure. There's a chance my child will struggle with depression and chronic pain as I have." So this is sort of the headline, the situation, the facts. And then the app encourages and coaxes people to kind of come up with their most pessimistic negative take to kind of unroot some of the automatic negative thoughts they might have. And this person wrote, "I won't be able to care for it, as sometimes I struggle to care even for myself." And then this is kind of what it looks like when it's packaged. So every time I do this talk, I take a different kind of story that has come from a user. And our app is completely anonymous. We don't know much about our users. But in this case, and in the spirit of maybe the kind of reducing stigma and maybe being more confessional, I'll admit that this is me writing this post. This is a picture of me at about that time showing my ambivalence about having a child. And by comparison, my wife's like unbridled enthusiasm and optimism. So I went ahead and posted that. And if I wasn't using this app, I would probably just kind of ruminate unproductively on this thought. It would maybe echo in my head, and I'd chew it over. But what's really cool about an app like this, and this is something a lot of our users have described, is that once you have an incentive to type something out, you know there's going to be this surprising social interaction. That's incentive. You start to write it down. You start to gain distance from it. And then you can kind of sense that you're pushing it over and giving it to someone else to work on. And so that can sometimes stop the ruminative aspects. You're letting the crowd sort of work on this for you. And the system now is a bit more simplified. We don't have as many of the loops. We're just having people do this reappraisal exercise, which really is just one tool. But we're trying to make the most simple user experience as possible to start with. And so some of the responses I got from that, I'll just read a couple I happen to like. So one person wrote, "I understand your fear. I felt that way before I had kids. And when I saw my daughter developing symptoms, I was sad and frightened. But now as a teen, she and I have a relationship that is deep and strong, born of trust and common experience. I'm so glad she's in my life. She's made me stronger because of my drive to care for her and by necessity, care for myself." Someone also wrote, "When you say all you can see is the dark side, it shows you realize there may be a bright side. While my mom often felt guilty for, quote, passing on her struggles with depression, I felt it made her a more sensitive and caring parent." So that last one especially resonated with me in a pretty profound way. I never really thought that there would be aspects to my history of depression that could possibly be leveraged in a positive way. And so sure enough, things moved along. But of course, a new whole host of worries came up for me. I don't have a picture of me now, but this is an artist's rendering. So there's a lot to worry about, if your wife is pregnant. And so I went back on the app to see if I could amend my thinking some more. And I wrote, "I'm having trouble getting excited by my wife's pregnancy. All I see are the negatives. I don't care enough to read the pregnancy books. I'm already a bad dad to my child." And I actually got 16 responses to this, and some were really quite marvelous. These come back really quite quickly, especially at peak traffic. We can get stuff back in around 10 minutes, sometimes less. This is one of my favorites. This one, it said, it's entirely normal for future fathers to not know how to feel during pregnancy. As the pregnancy goes on, you will probably go through a wide range of feelings. My own child's smile had an effect on me that I never thought possible. I could never even say, quote, I love you to someone other than my wife or previous girlfriend until I had a child. So this was also really powerful for me. And I think there, at least among my peer group, a little bit of stigma for me to admit that I'm ambivalent or anxious about my wife's pregnancy, or maybe not sure I'm going to be a good father. But I was able to at least explore these feelings and get some preliminary reinterpretations that could at least cut my emotions down a little. So how do we train people to do this? These are people from all over the world at this point. This is a huge thing we've been working on for years now. And the training involves some explicit instruction, but we really try and do this as implicitly as possible. So there are elements of the visual design. We try and highlight behaviors of other people to educate people. So when you first download a social app, sometimes it's this feeling of being at a party where you don't really know anyone, and you kind of have to look at the norms of behavior and model them. So we try and do our best to elevate and highlight good exemplars of behavior and use that to teach people. And we also do have some explicit tutorials that we are constantly iterating with that we surface in the app to help people. So as I was building this, of course, I really wanted to evaluate it, and I was mostly interested in these two areas. I wanted to see if repeated use of this could convey any psychological benefit, and I was also very, very interested in whether this might have engaging properties. This is, one of the core thesis of this idea is we want to build something that will engage people. So along with some colleagues at MIT and Northwestern, we ran a randomized controlled trial which was published in the Journal of Medical Internet Research. And we randomly assigned people to use a web version of Koko. It was very similar, but it was in the web at that time. And then the other half were assigned to do a web-based version of an expressive writing task. So the control task in this case was designed to be identical to the treatment task, except we didn't have any reframe training or crowdsource interactions. If you were in the expressive writing condition, you're just writing down negative thoughts, and there were some prompts to help you do that. The idea was to compare these such that we matched everything except the specific factors that we were most interested in. And so we looked closely at a depressed cohort, looking at people who scored above 15 on the SESD. And I'll just quickly show you some of the data we have from this. So this is the top row here. And these are measures, outcome measures that we want to see go up over time. So we want to see these lines go up, up and to the right. And you can see for both conditions, they went up. There was no significant difference between the control and the reframing task for these outcomes for depressed individuals. These outcome measures, by contrast, we want to see go down over time. And for both these interventions, we saw very significant decreases in depression symptoms as measured by the SSD. We also saw some pretty dramatic decreases in something called perceptive thinking, which is there's a scale that looks at rumination and other aspects of that. And we did find some significant differences between the crowdsourced app and this control condition here. And this is just another look at the change score there. But as interesting as that was, I think some of the most interesting data is still coming out of this study. This is just a very rough early bit of data coming out of some colleagues' lab at Columbia, where they were looking at, okay, who is benefiting most from this platform and why? People on the crowdsourced app, they could post stuff. They could reply to other people. We didn't really specify what sets of behaviors could be done, and people sort of naturally did a whole host of different things. What they found was, or what they're looking at now, is that the people who benefited the most on the system were the people who helped others the most. So if you were posting a lot and not helping other people, you're getting this crowdsourced reframing, which was my whole kind of original idea for this, but you weren't actually getting that much benefit. The people who benefited the most were those who quickly transitioned into this helper role. And I think having lived and breathed with this project for so long, I think there's a lot of hypotheses as to why that could be. There are a lot of people who come on and start feeling self-efficacy very quickly with this kind of app. They compose a reframe to someone else. They think, oh, this is probably terrible. I can't do this for myself. How could I possibly do it for someone else? And then 5 minutes later, their phone bings and they get a thank you note that's really detailed from the person who really appreciated it. They get a feeling of social connectedness. Another thing some of our users have said, and they sort of write us spontaneously, is that they start seeing that as they're composing responses for other people, they start building up more muscle memory, so to speak. And so a couple users have written about this. One says, after doing more and more reframes, that mindset started to permeate into my thinking. And when I faced a difficult scenario, I started thinking, how would I reframe that if I read it on the app? Another person said, I'm dreaming about reframing. I'm not sure what a reframe dream is like, but I'll take her word for it. And we have a whole host of qualitative data. What's really cool about deploying a system like this is how much data you can get. So when we launched, we got thousands and thousands of people, and we have hundreds of qualitative pieces of feedback that just came in unsolicited through our chat channel and stuff, and you can read them there. So a lot of people did feel this app resonated with them. And in the medical clinical trial paper, we have a lot of data about engagement metrics and so forth. But I'd like to sort of look at some of the usage data of the mobile app now, or at least when we did our beta test. So as I'm sure a lot of you probably know, most apps out there get downloaded and discarded pretty quickly. So that's a huge challenge we face. And this study looked at 100 million devices and a whole host and constellation of apps. And they found that on average, 2.3% of users remain active on an app after 30 days. So in our beta phase, which was about 3,000 to 5,000 people last fall and spring, we measured that 40% of users remained active after 30 days. And after 4 months, 25% of users were still coming back on and contributing. And so as I've been exploring this, my mindset has really started to change from building this project where we consume help from this crowd. My early prototypes, I kind of look back with a little bit of embarrassment because they were sort of almost exploitive. I was just sort of paying people to help me in this sort of strange way. But it's now become a much more natural platform where people very reciprocally and naturally interact and help with each other. And I think when you build the foundation for that kind of thing, interesting, spontaneous things can come out that you never would be able to design for. So a good design principle is to build a platform and not over-design your system, but let people show you some of the good things that can sprout out of it. And one of the things I'm really excited about a platform where maybe the core interaction that people gravitate to is helping other people is that some of the benefits of this could extend beyond the app itself. So you could get more of an expanding virtuous circle. And this is a quote from a user who says, "My 12-year-old co-authored a reframe on the app this morning. She wrote a very nice one too. Koko has become a door towards change for both of us. Attempts at therapy have done little for my daughter's depressive tendencies, but she's gotten very interested in participating in my Koko practice. It's a non-threatening way we can approach some difficult subjects. It's opened up some great conversations." So again, the transition for me was one where the model was this, where you're consuming from the crowd, to a much richer model. And this is not something I came up myself. This is based on what the users were doing, what their own behavior was, what their own feedback was. But they were sort of showing myself and my other collaborators and designers that this really needs to be a more rich social system one where you're not just consuming help, but you're getting help by helping other people. And we look forward to continuing this collaborative spirit on the app. I encourage you guys to check it out and download it. We try and do collaborative design as well. We show mock-ups and rough prototypes to a lot of our users and get feedback from them that way. I do want to quickly acknowledge my teammates at Koko. There are many really, really great product people helping us build something that can resonate with a wider audience. And then also the Media Lab for supporting this work. They supported this work for many years. They let me take time off for health reasons and come back to it. And also some of my collaborators at other universities and institutions. So I think we may have some time for questions, but thank you so much for listening, and I really appreciate your attention. Okay, someone asked, where did we get the name? I wish I had a really ingenious, snappy answer to that. One thing that we like about the name, if you can kind of see, is one of the themes of the app, again, we try and make it really simple, is this simple idea that there are multiple ways to look at something. So if you look at the logo itself, you can see a little ligature that connects the O and the K. So we tried to kind of create a okay sort of spin on it. That's sort of where we landed.
Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I have two questions. The first is, do you have any sense of the age and demographic profiles of the users? And then the second question is, how actually do you go about training these users to be appropriate?
Yeah, good questions. So the first one, unfortunately, we don't have great data. So as part of what we think is valuable and what people want in an app like this, we've tried to make it as anonymous as possible. And for that reason, we strip out all personally identifying information. So we don't collect name, we don't collect email. We do surveys within the app quite often, and we've done a few of those. I would say the demographic, it definitely leans female, close to 74%, something like that, which is pretty common with a lot of these approaches. We have a lot of work to do to reach more men. The age range really varies. We have younger people. We have people up into their 70s, they've told us. So it's pretty broad, but I think it probably clusters in late 20s, early 30s. And the other question was, how do we make sure people behave, I think, or learn how to do this? So we do a lot of things. I think there are two kind of things we're constantly working on. One is preventing malicious behavior, and the other is just raising the quality in general. So people may be well-intentioned, but some of their work may not be well-received, or it may fall flat for whatever reason. So for malicious behavior, we've been working on this ever since this was a research project, and it was something the IRB at the time really wanted us to nail. And that was really great because that foundation has stayed with the app. So we have a whole host of defense mechanisms. We have algorithms that look for words and phrases that are associated with bullying or any kind of malicious language. We have moderators who read every single response before it comes out, and we use these crowd-based services where you can hire people to look at something for a couple cents and review it, and it can happen instantly. So we can still get responses in 5 minutes and still have them moderated. As far as like raising the quality, that's something that's really tricky. Because we don't try and hammer our users with a lot of heavy, explicit tutorials or instructions, we do have some of that. A lot of it sort of comes down to norms and the norms of what other people are doing, teaching, and then also curating. So we can have people upvote things, and that sort of lifts the good stuff, and we can de-emphasize and emphasize that accordingly. But the norms do shift in ways that we can't always have control over. And sometimes we're sort of at the mercy of who is coming onto our app at what moment. So a few months ago, Glamour magazine did a piece on the app, and we had a whole drove of of younger users who weren't adhering to some of the norms that the older users were used to. So there was a little bit of a social clash that happened, and our user forums were going crazy. But we do have mechanisms to kind of re-nudge that back. Yeah. Any other questions? It's hard for me to see.
I'll go. I really appreciated how you shared your personal story as part of this presentation, and I'm curious, there's been a lot of struggles with mental health among students at MIT, and I'm just curious about whether you've been sharing your own story and experiences with that community.
I think the question is like, what have I, just share some experiences about MIT and mental health issues there?
Just whether you've disclosed that, whether it's with students or sort of talking about, you know, as a respected member of the Media Lab, whether you've been doing that there.
I'm no longer at the Media Lab, so I'm in New York City now, but you know, I spent 7 years at MIT. I did master's and PhD there, and I think I can say from my perspective that the climate has changed there pretty dramatically in the last year or two. We had a lot of suicides in, I'm not sure which year it was, but a couple of years ago there was a really awful clustering. And I think what we saw was the students really taking a lot of initiative themselves to grow student groups and student movements. We also got a lot of funding for well-being programs. So my former advisor is now doing campus-wide well-being courses and studies, and people are trying to hack well-being as MIT students do. As far as like my own personal experience, I didn't really disclose my own mental health struggles that much as a graduate student. But I think that was mostly because I was in a little room writing code, not talking to people. So I didn't really have a venue to do that. I would have been happy to. I'm kind of an open person when it comes to that stuff. But yeah, that's a good question.
Hi, I was just wondering, and this is a little bit of a follow-up perhaps to the first question. How do you deal with a heightened level of acuity? So for example, suicidality, things of that sort. You've mentioned your moderators. Do you have a way to respond to those incidents?
Yeah, that's another thing that's been in place from the start. So we use a very similar type of like layered system where we look for keywords, and we have a ton of data now with a lot of keywords that may suggest someone might be in danger to themselves or others. We also have moderators looking for that. They use a very, very conservative rubric, and then that bubbles up to actually us and my team, and we go through and manually look. And if someone is or seems to be in crisis, and we, again, are very conservative, we don't know whether they're using figurative language or really intend. And these are very short bits of text, so there's not much we can do. But once we see that, we automatically send them a message and try and route them to services like Crisis Text Line or other global services. The other thing we try and do is constantly throughout the app, at opportune times, reinforce the idea that this is a self-help tool, not a formal mental health resource. So we don't want people relying this on as a crutch when they should or could be going somewhere else. And we're also working with other research universities like UPenn and University of Maryland to comb through our data, which is now pretty vast and labeled, to better improve the algorithms so that they can be more automated.
Hi, thanks very much. One question and one comment. Have you tracked the topics that people are discussing? You know, is it bipolar disorder, major depression, suicidality? What have you found are the most common topics? And two, how do you know that 74% of your users are women? And then after you do that, I'll have a comment.
Okay, cool. The second one's very easy. We just do big surveys on the app. So they come out on the app. I mean, there's obviously some sample bias, but we actually get quite a few people to answer the surveys, especially when they were in beta. We haven't done that in a while, so I'm not as confident about that metric, but my strong intuition is that probably holds up. Your other question was about topics. So the app now has you select a topic, and we're kind of doing that for that reason, to sort of better understand what people are posting about, but also to maybe organize the network. So, you know, if I'm posting about parenting and you're an undergrad, you might not want to necessarily see like 6 posts about parenting in a row. Right now, the app does that, so we're trying to work around that. But as far as like topics, you know, kind of anecdotally in different settings, I'd see different things. So when this was at MIT as a student project of mine, and I did, you know, some small pilot studies with students, and then a lot of the participants in the randomized control trial were students. A lot of the topics were procrastination. I'm procrastinating. That was huge. There were a lot of people who were nervous about seeking formal mental health, like going to the campus wellness center. So that was really cool, because you'd see this kind of crowd come and help reassure people and sort of reframe some of the sort of stereotypes people would have. So in that respect, you could see it as a gateway to seeing more formal treatment sources. But the topics vary a lot. Now that it's widespread, I do see a lot just kind of anecdotally on adultery and relationship issues. I think it would be really interesting to look cross-culturally. So we have a lot of users in Russia now. We have users in the Middle East. It'd be interesting to see what the topics are for them. But we haven't really done that analysis yet. And you had a comment?
Well,
another question?
Yeah, one of the questions, I was just trying to download it on my Android. Is it available for Android?
It is iPhone only, but if you sign our little mailing list, we're working very hard, not just on an Android version, but on a system that could go to any device, cross-platform. And so we're working with some big messaging companies to see if we can't embed it naturally into apps that already work really well on Android and iOS.
I'm looking forward to that. Okay. So my comment was this. Well, I used to be a typesetter, and now I'm a doctor, but I really like your logo and the colors, but it looks to me, this is just a gut reaction, like something that would fit in well in Martha Stewart Living, color-wise and typography-wise. So I'm just going to suggest that you might do a version for men that's Futura Bold, that's black and white or something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was...
I think that's a good idea. I think definitely the visual branding and style could cater to the male audience better. Thank you.
And without the mic, please join me in thanking.
Thank you. Thank you.
My job is to close, to thank, and I'm going to add to comment just a bit, and we'll do this in 2 minutes. The title of this theme this year was Interpersonal Relationships and Student Mental Health. The first talk by Bernice actually had that subtitle of what do we think, what do we know, and what can we prove? I think in some strange way, as I was listening to you, Rob, they provoked a few thoughts from me. I scribbled them down while I was sitting next to Dr. Winfield. I don't know what we know or have proved, but I do know that there were a bunch of things that came out based on this meeting and probably preconceived ideas of what I think and what I think we know enough about to be confident about. One, interdisciplinarity is a must. Collaboration is a must. Peers are powerful, and we need to use them more. Silence kills, stigma kills, silos perpetuate silence and stigma, and we ought to do everything possible to get rid of them. That will be hard. It is hard in our day-to-day existence. We compete with each other rather than essentially look at new models. We have therapies and treatments that can help many, but not all. They should be learned if they're really going to be most effective. We had some great presentations on IPT, CBT, and variations, DBT, mindfulness. Unfortunately, We do know that we don't know which ones help for which people. We don't yet have personalized, precise strategies that say, I know what will work for you. So the unmet need is great on college campuses, and it's getting greater. Social media has now become part of our lives, and listening to some of the themes, social media approaches might help meet that unmet need. However, if we're going to get there, thinking out of the box is essential so that we have people like Rob and others develop new approaches. Otherwise, they won't appear. The other thinking out of the box that struck me, applies to me as well, is we need to think out of the box if we come from one tradition and have to start adopting a new approach, such as the one we just heard. They don't automatically mix, and that will also be difficult. If we then started to say, okay, what's going to happen in looking ahead, face-to-face interactions, one-to-one treatments, etc., are they going to disappear? No, I don't think they'll ever be replaced. But to meet the unmet need, I think we really should give some impetus and push to some of the things that we were hearing at the end of this presentation and at other times. We've got to think out of the box to go forward. What I also know, and this is the closing part, is as I was hanging around during this week, there was a buzz. There's optimism, there's hope. There's a feeling of bringing people together, like this conference has done, actually is revitalizing. It gives us a chance to learn from each other, to teach each other, and to, in some cases, actually even collaborate as to what can be done next. And in that sense, there's a challenge that I've had the privilege to convey with Todd and with the team that put these things together. Daniel Eisenberg had a great meeting before this whole thing. I think this has been always an exhilarating experience. We need some help for themes. What should be done next year? And what are some real cutting-edge thinking out of the box approaches that meet your needs? Because in actuality, collectively by what you do here, but more importantly by what you take home and spread the word, we are the force that will change things. When I began, I actually said that I thought that we've made a lot of progress from 14 years ago. There is a feel that's different about how we talk about things, how these topics get discussed on college campuses, the involvement of administrators. It is different, but we still have a long way to go. So help us with a theme and come back next year. And now in a final way, there's always somebody who really is essential for pulling this all together. And I don't even know that she's in the room, but please join me in thanking Trish Meyer. And knowing Trish simply because otherwise she's going to say, it's time for you to stop. She probably is in the room, I hope she is. But thank all of you, you've been great, and it's been a terrific meeting. Travel safely.